In this video, we're going to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program loan application forgiveness. So there's an 11-page application that just came out. It's right here that we're going to go through. Now, this is just going to be a high-level overview because it just came out and it is quite detailed, but I want to go over the main points so you can get prepared to get your PPP loan forgiveness. But before we do, if this is your first time at our channel or you haven't subscribed, click on the subscribe button at the bottom. My name is Travis Sickle, Certified Financial Planner, helping you reach your financial goals. So this application just came out and it's actually in two different locations. You can get it on the SBA's website or the treasury.gov website. And I'm going to leave a link in the description so you can pull up the application. And it is 11 pages. It seems a little bit overwhelming, which it kind of is, but I'm going to go through it. We're going to go over a high level overview so you can start to get familiar with it. You don't really want to get too in depth on this application at this point because there probably will be more guidance. But if you're going through it, you just want to make sure that you're applying the correct formulas to both payroll and the other costs that you can get forgiven, such as mortgage interest, utilities, and rent payments. So we want to make sure that we're covering those so you can maximize your PPP loan forgiveness. So I'm going to pull it up on the screen so you can follow along with me, but we're going to start right at the top. So all borrowers must submit 1 and 2 to their lenders. So the first point in that first paragraph right there, or the second paragraph, says that the PPP loan forgiveness calculation form and the PPP Schedule A are the two pieces that you need. Numbers 3 and 4, you don't have to submit to your lender, but you can just go through them and keep them for your records. And I'm pointing that out because it is 11 pages and it seems really redundant when you're going through this, but you do want to go through every single page just to get familiar with this application so you can make sure that you're maximizing your PPP loan forgiveness. And the next section on that first page, the instructions for PPP loan forgiveness calculation form. Now, the first few are just your basic information, but you can see that I have 3 groupings here. And that first grouping are important numbers, the employees at time of loan application. I don't know exactly which date you should use just yet, so we're going to wait for more guidance on that. But the employees at time of loan application, is it the date that you applied for the loan, the day before, the day after? It's really unclear, but you're going to need that number, so we're going to want to put that to the side. Then the second one there is the employees at time of forgiveness application. So that's going to be at the end of your 8 weeks. And then the PPP loan disbursement date, which is important because this is going to coincide with the covered periods, which we're going to get into just a second. And you'll see why. And then the EIDL advance amount. So if you got the EIDL grant, the advanced amount, which was 1,000 times the amount of employees up to 10,000 by the SBA, then that number will reduce the amount that you're going to get forgiveness on the PPP loan. But I'm just going to point this out that it's not the end of the world because that PPP loan is now a loan and it's at 1%. So you're not going to get forgiveness if you've also received the EIDL grant advance. So if you've got that money, that is forgivable, and the PPP will just turn it into a 1% loan. And then jump down to the covered period and the alternative payroll covered period. And that's what I was referring to with the PPP loan disbursement date. Why is that important? Because the date that you received the money for the loan is the date that the clock started. But you can also use an alternative date. And they're saying it's for administrative convenience. And what they're saying is, borrowers with a biweekly or more frequent payroll schedule may elect to calculate eligible payroll costs using the 8-week, 56-day period that begins on the day of their first pay period following their PPP loan disbursement date, which is called the alternative payroll covered period. Now it says for administrative convenience, obviously you want to use this to your advantage. What works in your favor? Should you use the date the loan is disbursed, the date it hits your bank account, or using your payroll payment dates? And there is more on that we're going to get into on the payroll dates and all that. So it's later on in the application. It's very, very important that you stick with it because there are some things, there are some moving parts that you're going to want to pay attention to. Now, the next section right here is if a borrower received PPP loans in excess of $2 million. So the good news on that is Treasury Secretary Mnuchin came out and said that they're going to scrutinize these loans if you got them and you shouldn't have really got them. I think a lot of people were freaking out whether or not, even if they qualified for the loan, whether or not they should take it because they don't want the Justice Department coming after them. But this guidance helps quite a bit. So if your loan was 2 million or less than 2 million, then they're not going to scrutinize you quite as much as the loans that are bigger, over 2 million. Putting that to the side, as long as you're doing this in good faith, it sounds like it should be a little bit easier to get forgiveness, a little bit less stress if you're going through this and figuring, hey, I want to use the money, I want to keep my business afloat, but I'm kind of afraid that they're just going to come after me for whatever reason. Now you can rest a little bit easier, not completely, but you gotta make sure that you're keeping your business afloat. So the second page, we're gonna flip over to the second page here, and I'm gonna go right down there onto line 11, and you can see the note, if applicable, that SBA will deduct idle advance amounts from the forgiveness amount remitted to the lender, which is probably something you already knew, that it was going to be reduced because that came out right in the beginning, that if you did get the idle grant, the PPP loan forgiveness portion would be reduced. But you still have the money, so it's going to be a traditional loan at 1% with the PPP money. And then here's the breakdown on the two parts to the PPP loan: the eligible payroll costs and the eligible non-payroll costs. So starting with these eligible payroll costs, eligible for forgiveness for payroll costs paid and payroll cost incurred. It's really important. I'm going to reread that because that's really important. Eligible for forgiveness for the payroll cost paid and payroll cost incurred. So they have to be paid and incurred in order for them to be forgiven. It's really key that you pay attention to that. Paid and incurred. And it's very clear here. It says payroll costs are considered paid on the day the paychecks are dispersed, and payroll costs are considered incurred on the day that the employee's pay is earned. I do think that's pretty clear, and I don't think that many people were wondering if they could just give the entire year's salary up front to get forgiveness. But if you were, well, unfortunately you can't. So it's incurred and paid. Now the next section the next line that I want to read here is count payroll costs that were both paid and incurred only once. So they have to go through that extra clarification that you can't double dip. So it's paid and incurred, not paid plus incurred. And then you have the eligible non-payroll costs. So these are that additional 25% or maximum of 25%. Because remember, what you received was 10 weeks worth of payroll. Technically, 80% would go towards payroll. But if you drop it to 75, that'd still give you forgiveness on that amount. And that's what this section is. So these are those other costs. So they are payments of interest on your covered mortgage obligations, your covered rent obligations, or your covered utility payments. And those utility payments are for business payments for a service for the distribution of electricity, gas, water, transportation, telephone, or internet access for which service began before February 15th, 2020. We already knew the February 15th, 2020 date. If you didn't, it's February 15th, 2020, but that is the date. You have to have these lease payments or these rent payments or the mortgage established by February 15th of 2020 in order to get the forgiveness. You can't just go into a lease agreement today and get forgiveness for it. So that's what the non-payroll costs are. And then it says an eligible non-payroll cost must be paid during the covered period or incurred during the covered period and paid on or before the next regular billing date. So with payroll, so this is really important with this sentence. With payroll, it's paid and incurred, but with non-payroll costs, I'm going to read that sentence again. And it says an eligible non-payroll cost must be paid during the covered period. So if you have one of these non-payroll costs, it has to be paid for. You have to pay it or incurred during the covered period and paid on or before the next regular billing date. Now, let me know in the comments down below what you think of this sentence. It sounds to me that what is ever paid for these expenses will qualify for loan forgiveness of that 25%. So if you're already looking at the employees and saying, okay, this is what's going to be forgiven because I'm paying these employees. As far as your utilities go, it sounds to me, if you did some prepayment here, that it would be forgiven. But that's the way it's reading to me. If you think if it's different, let me know in the comments down below. Again, this is the first time we've looked at this, or I've looked at this. So let me know in the comments down below what you think. Do you think that the utility payments are payments that could be paid in advance and still forgiven? Because that's what this sentence is telling me. An eligible non-payroll cost must be paid during the covered period, or incurred during the covered period and paid on or before the next regular billing date. I wonder why they didn't use the word and incurred like they did with the payroll costs. Let me know in the comments down below. Now, the next page that we're going to look at really quickly, this is the calculation form that you're going to go through. And you can see that I have highlighted the idle advance amount. You just have to notate it so they can subtract it. That's what the SBA is going to do. And then you can see we can jump down to all lines 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are all the costs that we just went through. And then they're going to reduce it if you have a reduction in your employee headcount, which really translates into full-time equivalency. Full-time equivalency is 40 hours. So if you have somebody that's a salaried employee, they're automatically, if they're working full-time, they're automatically at 40 hours. But you could see my little note there that says safe harbor, and I put 1.0, which is really like 100%. So safe harbor, I want to take a look at that because that is really important. And that is what you have to pay attention to today to make sure that you're maximizing your PPP loan forgiveness. So let's jump to the safe harbor because I think that's really, really important. So it's a couple of pages ahead and it's going to be on page 8. So there's two parts. There's the FTE, which stands for full-time employees, reduction safe harbor. And then right above that is the reduction exemption. So let's read the safe harbor first. If you meet both of these criteria, you're in the safe harbor zone. So basically, you're not going to have any reduction if you qualify here. So what it's saying is if you meet both of these, number one, the borrower reduced its full-time employees, FTE employee levels in the period beginning February 15, 2020 and ending April 26, 2020. And so if you reduce, you furloughed people, then that's a reduction. So, and 2, the borrower then restored its FTE employee levels by not later than June 30th, 2020 to its FTE employee levels in the borrower's pay period that included February 15, 2020. So what's interesting about this, it sounds to me like if you had brought everyone back at half-time, only part-time, then you not only would not get forgiveness for the money that you paid them, but it would be reduced because you reduced the full-time employee count. But if you had laid off or furloughed people or just downsized or whatever in the beginning, before the pandemic or in the beginning of the pandemic, and now brought everyone back by June 30th, then you'll be okay. That's what it's saying. That's what the guidance is saying right here. And even if you couldn't do that, right above it was the reduction exemptions, where if there was a case where you had to fire somebody or voluntarily resigned or voluntarily requested and received a reduction in their hours. So if someone says, I don't want to work full time, that will also get you exempt from having to reduce the amount of PPP loan reduction. So you're going to maximize your PPP loan forgiveness. And it says any FTE reductions in these cases do not reduce the borrower's loan forgiveness. So someone doesn't want to come back. It sounds like, okay, we'll just document it. They don't have to come back and you're not going to be penalized for the other money that you're paying out. Now, obviously the money that you have in your bank account, because that employee is not showing up to work, then that's going to turn into a traditional loan at 1%, which really isn't the end of the world either, because now you have money in the bank to support your business moving forward. And if we jump over to page 10, we can see that all the documents, wherever you're pulling this information, you can see I highlighted it there. Bank account statements, tax forms, 941s, your payroll documents, the payment receipts, canceled checks or account statements, all the same stuff in the beginning where you're applying for this loan application. You're going to need to pull that information for getting the forgiveness. So if you have utility bills, telephone bills, all that stuff, you're going to want to pull that documentation so you can give it to the lender. And when you're planning for the forgiveness, you don't need to bring back the same employees or even with the same job titles, because your business might have changed drastically, or even in this 8-week period, it has changed drastically because the economy and the US hasn't completely opened up yet. So if you have different roles, different pay rates, different titles, different people, all of that's okay. It's just a matter of how it all adds up. So your total payroll, your total employee hours, the head count, all that bakes into getting the loan forgiveness. So again, if you're opening up your business and it's reduced staff or reduced hours for certain areas, but you need something else accomplished, maybe some internet marketing or something completely different, then you can do that. And that will work with the PPP program. You don't need to bring back the same people if you don't want to or don't need to. So with the safe harbor provision and the full-time employee reduction exemptions, and also the 2 million or less in loan scrutiny, this is going to make it a little bit easier for you to focus more on your business rather than focusing on getting forgiveness, because it's going to be a little bit easier given this guidance. And there might be more. So just use this as a guide. It might get a little bit easier to get forgiveness. Hopefully it will. So Mnuchin said that he's open to it. So hopefully it gets a little bit easier to fill out this application and they can shrink this 11 page down to just a couple of pages. But that's just wishful thinking. Hopefully they can do it. But at this point, this is the guidance that we have. If you have questions, let me know in the comments down below. And once we get more guidance, it would make more sense. Then I'll do a video on going line by line on this PPP loan forgiveness application. And if you've enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and leave your comments down at the bottom.